It was buried on the back of a single nobody remembers, dismissed by its own producer, and almost lost to obscurity entirely. And yet, it became one of the most recorded songs of the 20th century. This is the story of the song that failed on release, but became a global hit, a song written for a forgotten prison film.
Your touch.
Unchained Melody began its life in 1954, written for a film that almost nobody remembers today. The movie was called Unchained, and it told the story of life inside the California Institution for Men at Chino, a real minimum security prison sometimes referred to as an honor farm. The film was written, produced, and directed by Hal Bartlett, who built the entire project as something close to a one-man operation, and it was very much a B picture, a modest production that has been almost entirely forgotten by film history, remembered now mostly as a footnote to the song it produced. The music was composed by Alex North, a respected film composer who would go on to score films like A Streetcar Named Desire, Spartacus, and Cleopatra. North wrote the melody as an instrumental theme meant to express the longing of a man imprisoned and separated from the woman he loved. He needed lyrics, and he turned to Hy Zarett, a songwriter he had worked with before. According to accounts of the collaboration, Zarett initially turned the job down. He said he was busy painting his house and didn't want to take on the work. North persisted, eventually convincing Zarett to set aside the home improvement project and write the words. The two men ultimately produced a deceptively simple lyric built around themes of longing, distance, and devotion that has proven durable enough to outlast the film, the era, and most of the people involved in making it.
Still more.
The song that resulted never actually contains the words Unchained Melody anywhere in its lyrics. The title is a reference to the film's theme, rather than a phrase pulled from the song itself. The melody freed from its prison setting, carrying the emotional weight of separation and yearning on its own, independent of any bars or walls. In the film, the song was performed by Todd Duncan, an opera singer who was, at the time, a respected but not widely known performer outside of classical and Broadway circles. Duncan had originated the role of Porgy in the premiere production of George Gershwin's opera Porgy and Bess nearly 2 decades earlier, giving him serious musical credentials, even if his name meant little to the general movie-going public of the 1950s.
Oh, my love, my...
Despite the film itself fading into obscurity almost immediately, the song attached to it did something unusual. It found an audience entirely independent of the movie that spawned it. In 1955, Unchained Melody was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Original Song, ultimately losing to Love is a Many-Splendored Thing. That same year, the song became something of a phenomenon in its own right, with multiple artists rushing to record their own versions, all chasing the same emotional core that Alex North and Hy Zarett had captured in a melody written for a prison movie nobody would remember.
Time goes by so...
A song that topped the charts before it even existed in its famous version. What happened next is one of the more unusual chapters in mid-century American pop music. In 1955 alone, 3 separate recordings of Unchained Melody by Les Baxter, Al Hibbler, and Roy Hamilton all reached the top 10 of the Billboard Hot 100 simultaneously. That kind of multiple version saturation on the same chart, for the same song, in the same year, was already a rarity. In the United Kingdom, the phenomenon was even more pronounced. 4 different recordings of Unchained Melody by Al Hibbler, Les Baxter, Jimmy Young, and the pianist and entertainer Liberace all charted in the British Top 20 at the same time. Jimmy Young's version actually reached number 1 in the UK and held that position for 3 weeks, with Al Hibbler's version sitting at number 2 for part of that same run. No other song before that point had ever achieved that level of simultaneous, multi-version chart saturation in Britain.
Oh, my love.
So by the time the calendar turned to 1956, Unchained Melody was already, in a very real sense, a hit. It had multiple successful recordings, an Oscar nomination, and a foothold in the popular consciousness on both sides of the Atlantic. And then, like a great many songs of that era, it began to recede from the spotlight as newer material took its place on the charts through the late 1950s and into the early 1960s. What almost nobody could have predicted, in 1956, was that the song's true legacy hadn't even started yet, and that the version of Unchained Melody that would eventually define the song for generations to come hadn't been recorded by anyone at all. The performer who would eventually deliver what is now considered the definitive version of the song wasn't even a teenager yet.
Lonely rivers flow to the sea.
The Righteous Brothers and a Coin Toss.
Still mine.
Bill Medley and Bobby Hatfield met while both were attending California State University, Long Beach, and began performing together. They were frequently told that their vocal blend sounded like black gospel singers, and the name Righteous Brothers reportedly came from black Marines in their audience who responded to their singing by calling out, "That's Righteous, brothers." The name stuck, and it became the identity under which two white singers from Southern California built a career rooted in the sound of soul and R&B, earning them the eventual nickname Blue-Eyed Soul. The duo's early success came through Moonglow Records, with songs like Little Latin Lupe Lu, and through regular appearances on the television program Shindig, one of the major rock and pop music showcases of the mid-1960s. In 1964, they met producer Phil Spector at a show near San Francisco's Cow Palace, and Spector signed them to his label, Phillies Records. Spector produced their breakthrough hit, You've Lost That Lovin' Feelin', in late 1964, a song that became a transatlantic #1 and is still regarded as one of the landmark recordings in pop music production history, frequently cited by musicians and producers as a turning point in what a pop single could sound like. By 1965, the Righteous Brothers were working on their fourth album for Phillies. Both Medley and Hatfield had a tenor and baritone vocal arrangement, and the duo had an informal agreement. Each of them would get to sing one solo piece per album, with Medley's deeper voice carrying one song and Hatfield's higher tenor carrying another. For this particular album, both men wanted to sing Unchained Melody. Hatfield was a genuine fan of the song already. He had performed it years earlier with his first group, a band called The Variations, and he especially admired the earlier recordings by Roy Hamilton and Al Hibbler, the same versions that had charted simultaneously a decade before. The two men settled the disagreement the way two friends might settle any small dispute. They flipped a coin. Hatfield won. He would sing Unchained Melody as his solo piece, and the song that would eventually become one of the most enduring vocal performances in popular music history nearly went to Bill Medley instead, on the strength of nothing more than the outcome of a coin landing one way instead of another. Recorded as filler, treated as an afterthought. Phil Spector, despite having signed the Righteous Brothers and produced their biggest hits, was not particularly interested in producing every track on every album. His attention and resources went toward the singles he believed would become hits, the songs he was willing to spend money and studio time perfecting with his famous wall of sound production technique, built on dense layers of instrumentation recorded by the collective of Los Angeles session musicians known as the Wrecking Crew. For the album tracks and lesser priorities, Spector handed the reins to Bill Medley, who had actually produced the Righteous Brothers himself before they had signed with Spector and Phillies Records. Medley took on Unchained Melody as one of these lower priority productions, but rather than treating it casually, he built it with the same wall of sound approach Spector had made famous, bringing in members of the Wrecking Crew and constructing a lush cinematic arrangement underneath Hatfield's vocal. The recording session itself produced one of the song's most famous and least expected moments. According to Medley, Hatfield recorded 2 takes of the vocal and then left the studio. As was apparently his habit, Hatfield reconsidered his performance afterward and came back, asking Medley if he could revise the ending. The technical limitations of the era made this a genuinely difficult request, with only 4 tracks available to work with. Recording over part of an existing take required real precision, since there was no way to simply layer a new track on top without affecting what was already there. Medley agreed to make the edit. The result was the now famous climbing vocal line at the song's climax, the soaring high note on which the entire emotional payoff of the recording depends. Medley would later say, "That moment became one of the defining elements of the entire track." Once the recording was complete, Spector made his decision about how it would be released. Unchained Melody was not chosen as an A-side. It was placed on the B-side of a different single, Hung on You, a song written by the celebrated songwriting team of Jerry Goffin and Carole King, who had already produced numerous hits for other artists by that point in the decade. The label's actual production credit on the single didn't even list a producer's name when it was first pressed. Unchained Melody went out into the world essentially as an afterthought, attached to a different song that was meant to carry the commercial weight entirely on its own. The Failure. That wasn't a failure. Hung on You, the intended hit, did not catch on with radio programmers or disc jockeys the way Phillies Records had hoped. But something unexpected happened almost immediately. Disc jockeys across the United States, listening to both sides of the single, began choosing to play Unchained Melody instead. They preferred Hatfield's vocal performance and the emotional power of Medley's production over the A-side the label had actually wanted promoted. Phil Spector, by most accounts, was furious. He had built his entire reputation and business model around controlling which songs became hits and which stayed in the background. And having radio programmers override his decision entirely undermined that system. According to Bill Medley, Spector was so frustrated by the situation that he personally began calling radio stations, trying to convince program directors to stop playing the B-side and switch back to Hung on You, as he had originally intended. It did not work. Listeners wanted Unchained Melody, and radio stations kept playing it regardless of what Spector wanted. The song climbed the Billboard Hot 100 throughout the late summer and fall of 1965, moving from number 20 in late September to number 15 to number 11 to number 8 to number 5, and finally to number 4 by early November. It peaked there, also reaching number 5 on the Cashbox Top 100 and number 14 on the UK Singles Chart. Later pressings of the single were updated to credit Spector as producer, once the song's success made that credit commercially valuable, even though, by Medley's account, the actual production work had been his. What had been conceived, recorded, and released as a literal afterthought, a B-side meant to occupy space on the back of a record that nobody expected anyone to flip over, had become one of the defining recordings of the Righteous Brothers' career, on the strength of audience preference overriding every decision the record label had made. 25 years later, a second life nobody predicted. For the next 2.5 decades, Unchained Melody remained a beloved standard, but it existed primarily as a nostalgia piece, the kind of song that turned up on oldies radio, at weddings, and on jukeboxes, without commanding fresh chart attention. The Righteous Brothers themselves went through breakups and reunions during this period. The original duo split in 1968. Hatfield continued performing under the Righteous Brothers name with a different partner for a period, while Medley pursued solo work. They eventually reunited and continued performing together periodically through the 1970s and into subsequent decades. Then, in 1990, a film called Ghost was released, starring Patrick Swayze and Demi Moore. Director Jerry Zucker used the Righteous Brothers' 1965 recording of Unchained Melody in one of the film's most memorable and frequently referenced scenes, a pottery wheel sequence between the two lead characters that became one of the most iconic moments in American cinema of that era. Composer Maurice Jarre also wove an instrumental version of the melody throughout other key moments of the film's score. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Audiences who saw Ghost flooded top 40 radio stations with requests to play the original 1965 recording. Polygram, which by that point owned the rights to the old Verve/MGM catalog through a series of corporate acquisitions, recognized the demand and moved to capitalize on it. The original 1965 recording was reissued on October 15, 1990, through the oldies reissue label Verve Forecast. The results were extraordinary for a 25-year-old recording. The reissued original topped the Billboard Adult Contemporary chart for 2 weeks in 1990 and reached number 13 on the Hot 100, primarily on the strength of radio airplay rather than physical single sales, since it had only been made available as a 45 RPM single in a market that was rapidly shifting toward other formats. In the United Kingdom, the impact was even larger. The reissue reached number 1 on the UK singles chart and held that position for 4 weeks, becoming the UK's best-selling single of all of 1990. As of 2017, it had sold over 1.17 million copies in Britain alone. 2 versions, 1 chart, 1 unprecedented achievement. The renewed demand for Unchained Melody created a complicated situation. Bill Medley wanted the original 1965 recording to be the version that benefited from the surge in popularity, but licensing arrangements tied to the old Verve/MGM masters made that complicated. As a result, the Righteous Brothers, Medley and Hatfield, by then both in their late 40s, went back into the studio and recorded an entirely new version of Unchained Melody for Curb Records, to have something they could release and profit from directly under their own current contractual arrangement. Hatfield, reflecting on the new recording, told friends that he hadn't lost any of his original high notes in the decades since 1965. He believed he had actually gained range since the original session. Critics who compared the 2 versions later noted that while the 1990 re-recording held up remarkably well, it did show some slight strain on the very highest notes compared to the effortless power of the original 1965 take. Bill Medley would later describe the decision to re-record the song as artistically a stupid idea, financially a wonderful idea, an unusually candid assessment of the commercial logic driving the choice. For 8 weeks in late 1990, both versions of Unchained Melody, the reissued 1965 original and the brand new 1990 re-recording, appeared simultaneously on the Billboard Hot 100. This made the Righteous Brothers the first act in the chart's history to have 2 different recordings of the exact same song charting in the top 20 at the same time. The new 1990 recording was nominated for the Grammy Award for Best Pop Vocal Performance by a duo or group at the 1991 ceremony, more than a quarter century after the original recording session. The commercial success that followed extended well beyond the singles themselves. The Best of the Righteous Brothers, a budget-priced compilation built around new recordings of their classic material, sold well enough to be certified double platinum by the RIAA. A separate compilation of their original 1960s recordings, titled The Very Best of the Righteous Brothers, Unchained Melody, became the duo's first entry on the UK album chart. The Righteous Brothers spent much of the 1990s and early 2000s touring extensively, performing regularly in Las Vegas residencies. A song that refused to stay forgotten. Unchained Melody has gone on to become one of the most recorded songs in the history of recorded music. According to the song's publishing administrator, more than 1,500 separate recordings have been made by over 670 different singers, spanning multiple languages and genres, from opera to reggae to orchestral instrumentals. Until 2014, it held a unique distinction in the United Kingdom as the only song to reach number 1, with 4 entirely different recordings by different artists across different eras, a record that stood for nearly 6 decades before another song finally matched it. The song's reach has extended well past the world of pop and adult contemporary radio. On June 21, 1977, just weeks before his death, Elvis Presley performed Unchained Melody at a concert in Rapid City, South Dakota. The performance was filmed for what would become his final television special, broadcast after his death in August of that year, and it has since been described by Rolling Stone as among the last great moments of his career. A man near the end of his life, pouring himself into a song that had already survived multiple eras before he ever sang it. His voice visibly affected by the physical toll of his final years, but still carrying real emotional power.
Oh, my love.
U2 recorded a version as a B-side to their 1989 single, All I Want Is You. The Smashing Pumpkins later recorded their own cover. The song has been performed at royal celebrations in the United Kingdom. Fans reportedly gathered outside Buckingham Palace to sing it during Queen Elizabeth II's Golden Jubilee celebrations, since it was known to be among her favorite songs, and it remains a staple at weddings, funerals, and moments of public mourning and celebration alike, decades after its original release on the back of a single nobody was supposed to notice. Bobby Hatfield passed away on November 5, 2003, found in his hotel room in Kalamazoo, Michigan, just 30 minutes before he was scheduled to perform with Bill Medley at a concert at Western Michigan University's Miller Auditorium. He was 63 years old. A toxicology report later determined that cocaine use had contributed to a fatal heart attack, compounded by advanced coronary disease that had already been present. The Righteous Brothers had been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame earlier that same year, in March 2003, with Billy Joel delivering the induction speech. They were later inducted into the Vocal Group Hall of Fame in 2005 and the National Rhythm and Blues Hall of Fame in 2019. Medley has continued performing under the Righteous Brothers name, partnering with singer Bucky Hurd since 2016, keeping the duo's legacy active on stages decades after the song that defined them was first dismissed as filler. The song that began as a forgotten film's afterthought, that was buried on a B-side by its own producer, that survived a furious Phil Spector calling radio stations to try to kill its momentum, somehow became one of the defining vocal recordings of the 20th century. Discovered twice, by two different generations, separated by 25 years, each time against the odds and against the original intentions of the very people who made it.
Your touch.
If this story brought back a memory or two, let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed learning the real story behind this song, hit like and subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from.